Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's WIDS Upskill Workshop. My name is Chisu Lyons, Executive Director of WIDS Worldwide. Before I joined WIDS, I spent several years in consulting and leadership roles, working with financial services organizations worldwide. At the core of what I did was help my clients make better decisions by leveraging data to solve their business challenges and achieve better outcomes. And better outcomes often went beyond the financial benefits. So many times, the benefit delivered by using data and scientific methods was objectivity in decisions, removing bias in systems and breaking down barriers for women. So it was meant to be that I join WIDS and be part of this amazing global community of awesome women in data science. I'm so excited to be your workshop host today and introduce to you Charity Taylor, EVP of Analytics for Publicis Collective. Charity found her way to the world of data and analytics more by accident than design. Her finance background, passion for data-driven decisions, and appreciation for the role of data structure in enabling analysis led her down a far more rewarding path than she could have imagined. She considered herself more of a logician or analytics translator than a data scientist. But no matter the label, Charity is proud of the role she played in advancing the use of data and analytics to fuel decisions across the automotive industry. Charity's session is titled Unlocking Success, Harnessing the Power of Ownership, Mastery, Initiative, and Teamwork, OMIT. Over to you, Charity.
Shizu. And thanks everyone who's watching for making the time to engage with this topic. I do hope to offer you a return on your investment. I've enjoyed the immense privilege and responsibility of leading teams across the finance, consulting, data, and analytics roles for a couple of decades now. A lot of what I learned along the way wasn't formally taught, which also means there's a decent chance it might take others just as long to cultivate a similar understanding, assuming they even have the opportunity to do so. The world could use more leaders in general and more women in leadership. So I'm sharing some of what I've learned along the way in hopes of speeding that along. 30 by 30, right? So in today's session, I will introduce what I've coined as the OMIT framework. I'll cover what it is, what it isn't, and provide some examples of how it might be used to assess and inspire both team and individual performance. By the end of the session, you should have a good idea of what a management framework is, how it might support you, and how to implement your own approach, whether it's a customized version of OMIT or something entirely new and all your own. With that, let's dig in. As I mentioned, I've been leading teams for quite some time now, and as I worked to serve clients and enable my team members, I came to realize this recurring theme that no matter the role, the level, or the circumstances, one's ability to succeed and grow would, almost without fail, depend on the ability to demonstrate four essential characteristics. Those are ownership, mastery, initiative, and teamwork. Those characteristics just so happen to spell out OMIT, and that seems quite fitting because when any one of these is underrepresented, what follows is the metaphorical equivalent of omitting a leg from a chair. Over time, I began to routinely assess performance according to these four characteristics and began to refer to this as the OMIT framework. I've shared it with my teams and especially my managing directors. They found it to be a useful tool as well. And together we've helped to guide our team's performance and enable their professional development. And OMIT works because everyone benefits when we establish clear expectations for ourselves and others, when we establish a consistent definition of success, one that clearly speaks to the how, even as the specific whats of business objectives or personal goals might vary across time, across quarters, across organizations. When we can share a common taxonomy and a curated lens through which to hold each other accountable. And if any of you are like me, you might find that even though you know what you need to know, you might forget that you know it at that very critical moment when you need to apply it. A repeatable framework can help. It makes that knowledge more accessible. It makes it easier to organize your thoughts. It also puts some boundaries on what those thoughts should be to make sure that they're productive so that you can identify the best path forward and take appropriate action. The OMIT framework can be used to guide performance assessments, and that's for yourself or your team. It can help you distinguish between what's working and where improvement opportunities lie. It can help you communicate, delivering a consistent message in a manner consistent with your values. Most importantly, it can help you engage in productive dialogue around what now. Now, if you're like me, you've noticed there's an abundance of educational content centered around the topic of difficult conversations. Those are necessary sometimes, it's true. That said, many would-be difficult conversations can be preemptively prevented by clearly defining what real success looks like and what it means to you. The difficult conversations you aren't able to preempt will be far easier to facilitate when you're able to draw clear distinctions between well-communicated expectations and examples of actual performance. I've used the OMIT framework as a tool to foster constructive dialogues, concrete action plans, and stellar performance. And you can too, whether you're talking to your COO, your CEO, your direct reports, or just yourself. No judgment. Ultimately, it's up to you whether you decide to leverage this particular framework, whether or not it meets your needs. But I would encourage you to adopt a management framework, even if it's not this one. With that, let's dive a little deeper and discuss what types of behavior these terms are intended to inspire. And because I've learned that some very well-intentioned individuals might misinterpret some of these, let's also get really clear about what we don't want to inspire. So what do we mean by ownership? Ownership means keeping our promises, preventing fires whenever possible, learning from every mistake. It's an opportunity, not a blame game. A traffic accident analogy might be a good way to think about this. When one gets into a fender bender here in the United States, the police will give a ticket or assign blame to the person last able to prevent the accident. So when we say prevent the preventable, we don't mean that we bear responsibility for the entire system. That's crazy. But we do consider it our job to keep our eyes open and pay attention to opportunities for risk and head them off when we see that risk increasing. Basically, we own doing the right thing. Ownership is not about accepting blame. It's much bigger than that. I'm sorry, plus ownership means I won't let that happen again. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to strengthen my process, strengthen my lens, and remember. What about mastery? I would describe mastery as not only thoroughly understanding my assignment, but understanding my assignment and my role in the context of the larger system. That means I understand how my actions impact those downstream. And I'm equally aware of how my deliverables can be impacted by upstream activities. I have a living if then decision tree in my head, and I wield it skillfully. One way to think about this might be a bus driver versus a taxi driver. Bus drivers drive a specific route, much like following a specific task list. There just isn't a lot of mastery involved there. On the other hand, taxi drivers own responsibility to get you to the airport, and they know that route to the airport will vary based on the time of the day, the construction, ceremony. That's mastery. Mastery is essential, especially for data science projects. Those building predictive capabilities must understand not only the business objective and the client need, but also the data that's available for use, and importantly, whatever limitations that data might carry, because every data set carries limitations. Technology is evolving rapidly these days, and many highly repeatable tasks that once depended on mastery have been automated, like that taxi driver example. But but the ability to correctly interpret source data, the judgment to distinguish sound logic from nonsense, and the industry expertise to identify when the algorithm has made a simplifying assumption that will never align with reality, those critical demonstrations of mastery might never be automated. That said, mastery is not about knowing all the things. We need to focus on the practical, the applicable, the impactful, what really will drive the individual and the organization forward. Now, initiative. I think of initiative as seeing a need and filling it, embracing continuous improvement, all without the need to be asked. Of course, while staying within scope. This is not about jumping into someone else's swim laning or off-roading without judgment or consent. Again, it's focused on the practical and the impactful. That brings us to teamwork. Teamwork is probably the simplest to describe, but it's super critical. In my world, teamwork means that no one struggles alone. Team members instead work towards a shared mutual purpose while exhibiting mutual respect. It is not a personality contest. We do not need to even like each other to respect each other, but we do need to respect each other and communicate effectively. So I'm guessing that you've seen some of these gaps in real life that fit this OMIT framework. While specific definitions of what constitutes enough for any of these characteristics will necessarily vary by role and level, I encourage everyone to customize this framework to fit their own specific needs and use cases. But it's true, it's so often in life, balance is key. Have you ever encountered someone who really wanted to contribute, but they simply didn't know what they didn't know? Exercising an abundance of initiative without the mastery to back it up is a lot like running with scissors. It's dangerous, but it's also a massive source of frustration and a waste of time. I've seen this all too often, and I imagine you have too. When was the last time you watched a clash between business and development teams over whether or not the requirements were to blame? This is technically initiative without mastery and ownership, but consider how much productivity might improve if business teams learned enough about technology to communicate effectively and development teams learned enough about stakeholder needs to correctly interpret their requirements. That could be a game changer, right? How about this one? Have you ever worked with someone who is extremely hardworking, diligent, knowledgeable, but unwilling or unable to share the wealth with others? Independent contributor status will take one only so far. True leadership is really an act of service, and anyone who wants to grow in their profession should start by lifting those around them. Mastery without teamwork is just a huge missed opportunity for the individual, for the team, for the organization. I mentioned earlier that not all difficult conversations can be avoided, and those that remain might often be rooted in a lack of initiative. Why? Because you and your team members must bring a certain level of motivation with you, a fire lit from within, so to speak. No initiative? Big problem. Because before initiative can serve to prompt proactive problem solving or innovation, it must first fuel a drive towards mastery and ownership. So, this is something you'll want to watch out for, especially as you evaluate prospective team members, because initiative is the gateway to developing mastery and ownership. With the OMIT framework, diagnosing underperformance as a weakness in one or more of these four key characteristics will help you build your action plan and your craft your response. If your team member is falling short in the ownership department, then your course of action should focus on instilling greater accountability. That could take many forms, like making sure assignments and deadlines are crystal clear, establishing more frequent check ins to ensure progress is being made, requiring peer reviews, or sometimes just asking your team members to summarize the assignment, next steps, timeline, and say it back to you. will help you spot communication gaps or misunderstandings so you can head them off before they have an impact. If errors or underperformance appear to be rooted in a lack of mastery, then education is your best bet. But bear in mind that everyone learns differently. You might need to draw a picture, say the same thing a different way to help the message land. I know there's nothing quite like teaching to internalize knowledge, so asking your team member to teach you about that subject will likely help. And at the very least, it will expose the knowledge gaps that can then be addressed. If your team member or family member or peer just doesn't seem to exhibit sufficient motivation to aid the cause, then you have an initiative problem, and incentives are the best tool here. You can exercise creativity to align their interests with your own, exploring far beyond raises, bonuses, promotions. Recognition is often most impactful, but other things like free lunch and treats and work from home privileges can serve as incentives too. That said, these are typically the most difficult to solve. So make sure that when you encounter one, don't waste too much time. These issues are far more avoidable than they are addressable. And that brings us to teamwork. I honestly believe that 99% of problems in this department and maybe even in the universe are really rooted in communication gaps. And those can stem not just from what was said, but how the message was received and interpreted by the receiver. So, investing a little time to establish shared values and develop a lens through which to interpret each other's behavior will provide a solid return. And I strongly recommend it. But in micro terms, it's also really important to make sure the why is as clear as the what. And sometimes that means providing a why between the who or behind the who and the when as well. It is not at all uncommon to see two people or two teams not in agreement, then walk away with very different understandings of what the next step should be. So the simple act of rephrasing, could you say that back to me, can work wonders here too. Bottom line, the best course of action will become clear to you when you trace signs of underperformance or dysfunction back to one or more of these four key characteristics that are required for success. So let's walk through a hypothetical scenario and examine it through the lens of OMIT to help us make sense of it. Imagine your team was responsible for causing a downstream production failure that was rooted in a mapping table update. In the process of updating or putting out the fire, so to speak, you hear a number of comments from across the team. Like, yeah, okay, so I did it a day later. What does that matter? Or, well, I didn't know this table was leveraged by a downstream process. Why would I know that? Or, oh, I did it before. It was never a problem. How would we assess this team's level of ownership, mastery, initiative, and teamwork based on these outtakes? And what gaps jump out at us? What next steps might guide us toward a more productive and successful future? So clearly, we have an ownership problem because promises weren't kept. But it seems that mastery is lacking here too, as team members were unaware of the downstream implications of their actions or the timing thereof, and how they might impact downstream processes. So ownership mastery, not off to a good start. But there are also a number of concerning elements here suggesting at least one team member doesn't even recognize they should be expected not to know better, not to just to simply perform repetitive tasks, but to understand their role in the broader system and act accordingly, even as the system itself evolves. Taking proactive steps to prevent failures in a dynamic environment really requires a good deal of initiative. So that's lacking here too. And the team was out of the loop with regard to a new downstream dependency, which could point to a lack of teamwork on sending out, on sending and or gaps in receiving end. So probably teamwork, maybe something more sinister than teamwork. But either way, doesn't look good so far. This is really not a good state for the team, and it's also not the most uncommon scenario. So what now? Well, if I were the team's leader, I would start by revisiting expectations for the team in the context of this specific process. We need to describe what success looks like and what that would have looked like in comparison to what actually happened. To address the gaps in ownership and teamwork, we might decide to add a few steps or live check-ins to the process to foster improved cross-team collaboration and greater accountability for adhering to agreed upon timelines. To improve the team's mastery, we might collaboratively document the revised process flow and taking care to highlight the critical tasks and handoffs throughout. And because changes in the product or subscriber portfolio might drive a need for future process tweaks, we could institute a recurring review session to clarify those assignments, the timing, and the downstream dependencies. And last but certainly not least, we might we want to make sure we highlight the progress as it materializes amongst this team to reward the kind of behavior that we hope to continue. It's important to focus not only on what was accomplished, but the how. Because remember, success can be silent. Make sure that you're rewarding those who prevent the fires and not just those who put them out. Now, let's talk through a hypothetical scenario and apply the OMIT framework to individual performance. Here we have a situation where Leslie's preparing for a performance review with Tom, and Tom's angling for this promotion. Leslie's hesitant. Why might Leslie be hesitant to recommend Tom for a promotion? And how can she coach him so that she can get him into a state where she can be able to support him for advancement? Let's take a look at Tom's performance through the lens of OMIT. Tom pointed to stellar turnaround time. That suggests solid ownership. That's great. And of course, that level of solid turnaround time is supported by strong mastery over his subject area. Fantastic. But a lot of complaints are traced to a handful of the same usual suspects. So why is Tom stopping at issuing tickets? Why isn't he taking action to prevent issues from occurring in the first place? Has he perhaps overlooked opportunities to engage with other members of his broader team to socialize the problems and outline a better path forward? Okay, so if I were Leslie, I'd probably be a little underwhelmed by Tom's lack of initiative and teamwork too. But herein lies a tremendous opportunity for Leslie to enable both Tom and the broader organization through some effective coaching. Leslie can leverage the OMIT framework to provide Tom with some really specific praise on his level of ownership and mastery, but reaffirm her expectations for greater initiative and teamwork given the scenario at hand. She can help Tom quantify the value of preventing these issues from occurring, support him in collaborating with his colleagues to determine the best path forward, and commit to ensuring that the value he unlocks for the organization through improved client satisfaction, greater bandwidth, availability to devote to higher value efforts is appropriately rewarded and recognized. That could be a win for everyone. Those are just a couple of scenarios where the OMIT framework can be put to use. There are many, many more, like diagnosing collaborative performance and pinpointing dysfunction within and across teams, like that missed requirements example. Or hiring. We mentioned that lack of initiative will really prevent anyone from growing and succeeding in the role. So create a hiring process that can help you test for that. One way I've found this pretty effective is to create an industry specific but quite simple question and pose it to someone who, if I have a candidate who really isn't equipped with any industry experience, if they know an answer to an industry specific question but haven't worked in the industry, they've probably taken the time to do some of their homework. That is initiative. If they don't have the answer, but the otherwise seemed really promising, see if you can follow up with them in a few days and find out if they went back and found that answer that they missed. That shows a lot of resilience and initiative, both good things. But you can also apply the lens of OMIT to vendor evaluations in much the same way, and is equally useful in explaining why your team member deserves a promotion or, on the opposite hand, a performance improvement plan. When you're evaluating your own new opportunities, you can ask whether your prospective boss exhibits these characteristics, and you check to see whether or not your values align. You can even bring the lens of OMIT into your home life. If you find yourself constantly nagging, try clearly setting some expectations and enforcing accountability with checklists and check-ins. Reward your kids for seeing a need and filling it, like doing the dishes without being asked. Initiative is the gateway to building mastery and adopting ownership. So why not start early? This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but I'm sure you'll find others if you just embrace the framework or a management framework of your own. But no matter how great I think OMIT might be, or how great the framework you develop might be, it will never be a magic potion. It will only yield value if you apply it effectively, and that takes a lot of practice. I and my teammates have found this very effective, but you'll find cases where the popcorn kernel just won't pop, where you are unable to inspire acceptable levels of performance, even when you wield OMIT framework with surgical precision. It happens from time to time. And sadly, you will find cultures that impede performance despite your own best efforts. So others might let you down. That happens. But if you've leveraged the OMIT framework to set a respectable standard and hold yourself and your team accountable to it, then at the very least, you won't have let yourself down or your team down. And in that, you might succeed in spite where you cannot succeed because of. So now it's up to you. Does OMIT seem like a tool you could use? If not, let it inspire your own creation. But commit to a reusable framework to make your message consistent and your knowledge accessible and actionable. Next, give yourself some practice by looking in the rearview mirror. How would you use OMIT or your own framework to set the bar and assess your own performance or others' performance? Guide your communication strategy. Now you're ready to apply your framework to a challenge you face right now. What pain points emerge? What actions should you take to address them? They might just jump out at you once you make it clear. But remember, there's a really good chance you know everything you need to know to meet the challenge before you. You need only remember that you know what you know when you need to apply it. A management framework can help you. You got this. Back to you, Chisu.
Thank you so much, Charity. This was wonderful. This was really fun. Like you, I also managed a lot of teams, global teams, data scientists, and in all different roles. And a lot of what you said really resonated. I love the fact that you, one of your last slides was other applications, right? Because these are really life skills, right? These are not just
Absolutely.
confined to as a management framework. It's to manage yourself, whatever the environment is. I remember in one of my past jobs, we were in consulting and we had somebody come in to teach us something about negotiation skills, sales negotiation. And we're all saying, oh, we don't need to know this. And I remember an aha moment from one of the employees that said, oh, I can use this to negotiate at home with my wife. And I'm thinking, oh, wow. But that was the point, right? These are such great skills to whenever you're dealing with people and you need to get things done together, the OMIT framework seems so relevant. So one of the things that I just like, oh yeah, that's so important is when you were talking about mastery, especially amongst data scientists. I find that a lot of people sort of hide behind their credentials. They focus so much on um, the content knowledge, mastering the skills. And what you said about it being having to, you need to connect that with the context, that really resonated with me, right? It's not just what you can do, but how it is relative to other people's roles. So I really love that because I think, especially for data science community, that becomes difficult since there's so much to learn. There's so much content and skills to learn. What do you think? Is that what prompted you?
It-
Because, yeah.
Absolutely. But we also know that so many data science projects fail. And why do they
Mhm,
fail? A lot of it comes right down to this. The
mhm,
solution they developed either didn't hit the mark, or the data they were using was misinterpreted, or they didn't understand that they needed a different data set, or maybe they needed a relative or derived variable rather than the absolute.
mhm.
Those things can only be explored really effectively if you understand deeply the problem you are attempting to solve. And you won't understand why it's a problem if you don't have the context of the industry and the client's
Exactly.
needs to inspire you. But where data science projects are really effective and become embedded, there's a level of mastery that enables that partnership on both the business side and the tech side.
Right.
It it, it builds a bridge. They each
Right.
lean in to learn enough about the other's space to make it
Mhm.
work.
Yeah. And these are so interlinked because the what you said about teamwork and needing to, you don't have to like the person, but you need to respect that their roles, right? And how they contribute to the end goal. I mean, that really that makes so much sense, right? How, and these are so interlinked, right? And that's why you have it as a system. It's a framework. You can,
Absolutely. Sadly, I see sometimes that teams can clash, or even individuals can clash, and really be dismissive of the other. And not only is that a failure of teamwork, it's usually a failure of mastery too, because they don't respect the problem. And
ah,
once you respect the problem, you can respect each other's position a little bit better too.
right. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. You said that there are limitations, of course, and you said that there are certain cultures and environment that may not be conducive. So, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So what I've learned through my experience, I've experienced a lot of different companies through my consulting uh, roles, as well as my own, full-time roles with other organizations. What I've found is that the cultures that enable folks like us, curious folks like us, to thrive are those that are learning cultures. Cultures that know everything, uh, not only they won't hear an alternative perspective, they don't keep an open mind, they don't engage curiosity, they don't engage debate. They wind up defending the status quo, and they prevent innovation and growth. That prevents it for the organization at large. You cannot grow and push boundaries in an organization that wants to preserve the status quo. So I would say the culture, what's really essential to culture to enable anyone's growth is that learning mindset. Um, so look for cultures that want to learn it all, not cultures that know it all, because hubris is kryptonite.
Hmm. Right. So, really hierarchical, authoritative cultures, maybe. And also like learning and also listening cultures, right? The
100%. Well, you can't,
curiosity.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
learn if you can't
Yeah.
listen. Yeah,
Right.
without a doubt. I mean, that those go hand in hand.
Yeah. So the other thing that I think is related to culture, perhaps, is incentives. I personally have struggled with this. I've always worked with global teams, and trying to understand what incentivizes people. I feel
Mhm.
like that kind of broaches on cultural biases, right? So my tactic, and instead of saying, I know you want X. I know you want a promotion. You want it. Instead of saying it that way, I spent a lot of time talking about the why, and you did as well in your framework. If you kind of set the vision, the goal, the definition, and you get everybody to focus on it, I feel like that is incentive. And it doesn't have to break down into, do you feel like you're getting enough pay? Do you want your bonus? Do you know what I'm saying? Right.
Yeah,
So that's kind of
absolutely.
how I avoided it, by just kind of focusing on the why.
Those incentives or objectives can really impede teamwork
Mm,
when you could create something way better by collaborating, but it's not in anyone's best interest to do so. That's a built-in obstacle for everyone. So finding finding the why that speaks to their why. So don't advance your own why. Find the
hmm.
why, find their why,
Yes.
and advance
Yes.
their why. You don't have to convince them to do it for your reasons. Convince them to do it for their reasons.
Yeah, that's a great point. I could talk to you about this forever. There's so many branches of your framework. Do you see, if you were to spend, if you had another, I don't know, day or two to advance your OMIT framework, in what direction would you like to take it?
I think there are a lot of different angles that it could go, like you mentioned. I think probably for this community, um, we could drill deeper into mastery, and that just unlocks, there are an infinite number of conversations we could have around mastery, because mastery is really required for success at any step in the development process. Uh, Data validation, I mean, building out that data validation framework requires a real level of mastery to be truly successful and supportive of those downstream development efforts. And y- that is at that's like the first step. That's the foundation on which any data science project is developed. So if you don't get the data right and structured in a way that makes development easy or use easy, then you've built in an inherent obstacle for everyone attempting to use the data. So mastery would probably be the one that's most salient for this organization. I think it
Yeah.
really plays into everything. And I think one of the things that really enables that mastery is another term I'll phrase or coin here is deliberate curiosity. There's been a lot of talk about deliberate practice, which is so important. I think harnessing a level of deliberate curiosity too can take others a long way. One of my first roles in General Motors in a financial role was managing the budgets and accounting and consolidation for powerhouses and wastewater treatment facilities. How uninspiring is that? But I forced myself to be curious about it. As a result, I'm probably one of maybe three financial analysts in the world that understand whether you want a centrifugal or reciprocal air compressor to run your paint shop, and how that decision impacts maintenance, ongoing maintenance versus your upfront investment, what that means to staffing, and what that means to paint quality. But it's just because I learned that, because I forced myself to be deliberately curious, there were so many around me willing to teach. And that helped me do better at my job and help them succeed too. And it created this virtuous cycle all around harnessing curiosity to build mastery and then applying that mastery forward.
And can I say that, as with that kind of approach, as a leader, I think you build a whole culture of deliberate curiosity. I love that. Thank you so much, Charity. I know I speak for the listeners, the viewers, that you opened up their eyes on many things that they can take away from this in their daily job and in their lives. And thank you so much for a wonderful workshop.
Thank you, Chisu. Appreciate you having me.